The D major choices that Bach made for Book 1 and 2 are extremely opposite. The Book 1 is really a right-hand practice of continuous flow of 16th notes from the second to the next verse, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Mademoiselle Boulanger would have made you practice 2, 3, 4 only, and 1 without, just the left hand playing the 1 of each group of 4 16th notes. She insisted that downbeats are rebouncing, not except final. When is the downbeat? This is an upbeat. In other words, there is no upbeat, there is no downbeat. There is only rebouncing beat. It's don't hard to hear. And that is also very important because the left hand, every 2 notes is the harmony, and every offbeat note is the melodic bass with the leading tone. It's just incredible how in one hand and the rest in between, Bach suggests a complete continual harmonization. And because it's about velocity of the right hand, it could be played faster, but then the air legato, which I demonstrated, cannot happen. It might become more connected. Not legato per se, but no more crisp. The crisp comes from the practicing of hold and poke. Because this way you hold the first and you poke 3 times the next, and you teach your fingers when to lift after they played, not only when the next one depresses, also. But the air legato is not necessarily continuous. It can be also combined with like calligraphy, with a bit of a thicker sound, and then lighter sound or thinner sound if it's aired. For that tempo choosing, I think that you should reach the fastest you can, but still have a crisp articulation through or alternatively. If you go faster, it's ridiculous, but it does make your practice 3, 4, 4, 5 because of the common tendon of 4, 5, independent. 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 3, 2, 5, 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 3, 2, 5. You could practice it in rhythms. Or also you can practice the harmonization, so you can memorize it. 5 after 2 and 1, and then 5 to A major, to skeleton harmonize it. And then you play through. And now you observe, I'm going to start playing some legato. Of course, you can bring out the corresponding downbeat notes between the 2 hands, and this. The step motion is in parenthesis inserted between the beats notes without accent. Of course, you could do 5-3-2 instead of 5-4-3, but then it doesn't make you progress to independently practice the alternation of 5/4 and 4/3 with common tandem. So you have to use it as Bach probably intended for this one to be more about velocity of fingers and practice to obtain that velocity. Not per se equalness. I think the equal is not the point of it. It's about the flow and the pulse and the impulse. So for the Book 2, it's incredibly majestic and jubilant and open in a way that festive. And I think that for this, the 12/8 that Bach uses in alternation with the 4/4 is because in Bach's time, the notation of a triplet, if there was the value of the triplet, 1/4 was written 2/8 notes. But in the context of 12/8 or triplets, it was played also long, short, one. When it's notated, I know, I was there. That's the ultimate impossible argument to make the point. But one can argue, therefore, if this always was the case. It could be also that it was slightly improvised for our standards. For their standards, it was just playing through with the variable of adjustments that is to do with the decorative patterns into the ornamental. Or you could have had then, if it's purely ornamental, mordent, because it gives the importance of the first of every two. Ti, ampa, rampam, the appoggiatura, the anticipation of the downbeat. As far as for the 12/8 is concerned, I like to bring out each of the first three in the 8th notes, not only as an accent, but more like a tenuto with progressive. As it rises, it crescendos. Mozart's last sonata in D major. Or Beethoven's first violin and cello, violin and piano, sonata. Isn't that surprising? No, I think it's just serendipitous. And also you could do this phrasing of 2 and 1, which corresponds to the bowing of the 3/8 notes. But it could also be short long instead of long short. Or the opposite, therefore, long and short. And if you play it all detached, it doesn't have to be even in the sense of the impulse. You can still have a little bit of an extra impulse on the notes of the beat. So when you have the 16th notes tiratas, like glissando, they have to be a tiny bit tighter than 16th notes. I didn't say per se openly 30 seconds I will be killed. If I prescribe performances that don't correspond to the text, after all, it's our sacred connection to the piece. But I could say that in ratio, if you tighten up a little bit the 16th notes by starting tiny bit after the 8th note rest, rather than, I don't want those 16th notes to be heavy by individual articulation. Re, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, la, re, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, la, re. It's too much. Too much intensity. I think it should be bounced. And the fact he starts with the left hand, it's an important thing because it's more a launching than a departure on the downbeat. It's not rum, it's yum. And that is something that you see happen in the beginning of the Barcarolle by Chopin. You have a downbeat, and then you have the second degree first inversion on top. It's not like I want to catch you. And here is the same. You immediately launch, basically, that's what it is. And so when you have choosing, which I think is at that point in this example completely too fast, is because it becomes hectic and it has to be jubilant, noble, majestic, but the tempo of the 16th notes for this crisp articulation while flowingly a tiny bit faster than the 16th notes demands for a not too fast opening. It is true that logically we should always take in account the fastest rhythmic values in their performance for our own choice of interpretation for the tempo choosing. And I think that in this case is 16th notes. In the Fugue of Book 1 in D major, he uses 30 seconds. Mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, re, si, la, sol, fa, la, si, do, re, do, sol, do, la, fa, mi, re, do, la, re, sol, fa, sol, mi, do, fa. So this vindicative re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, fa, re, si departure on second beat, which we don't know at the beginning since there is no way to know. 1, 2. All what these 30 seconds do is prepare the crescendo or intensification of the D to the leap to the B. I told you the importance of the leaps is something that you have to take so much in account for the characteristic of your interpretation and therefore for the choice of the tempo. You could also play a tiny bit rubato by playing the first 4 a little hold back and then the next 4 a little bit tighter so that you feel like you have it ya da 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 ya da 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 da. Now it is very tricky because if I suggest that and it becomes it's way too much. It has to be just a little hesitant and a little forward. Like I like to call it lean forward rather than rush. Like magnetically you're attracted to the B, which is the appoggiatura of the fifth of the dominant. Re, si, la, sol, fa. So the leap up is very dramatically prepared. But then on the way down, we have immediately very calm step motion with a looser tight, since it's 16th note, not 32nd, dotted rhythm. He didn't write that, right? You wished? Me too. But he wrote 16th notes. It has to be very articulated. Okay, and the Fugue of Book 2 is extremely unlike the first book, very fingerish, This is completely voice-ish. Chorale singing. Kyrie eleison. Something. Kyrie eleison. And then Christ eleison. You can put the syllables to sing it in order to organize the tempo, because the repeated notes in the subject are very difficult to play on the piano, because either they're repeated and they're chopped, even if they're progressively developed in crescendo. But in fact, I think the repeated notes are not staccato, they're just repeated, like a change of bo, po, 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 do. And if you have the action of the piano that you can control under the escapement, either it doesn't repeat, which is what I try to develop as an example, but also if it repeats. So you can do po, 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 di. Why? Because when you sing syllables on the same note, it doesn't sound like the same note, because the syllables change, the words mean something, and here you don't have that legato capacity on each not pa 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 ta ha ha. So you replay it before it's fully lifting. So you have the continuousness ta ha ha ji. And the fact is that he could have done the repeated note in the second half of the subject. But he didn't. And what's interesting is the kind of statement that you get from a subject of Bach's choice. You start at the top D and you end in the bottom D. It's basically a scale with leaps of fifths. And if you want to bring that, then you can shape, sculpt the phrasing. Of course, you're not playing like that when you play the piece, but you hear it, you think it, you project it, you imagine it, you bring it out from this with a very choice of touches that allows to bring out the hints of these fifths more than the other notes. Chosen according to the capacity of voicing the cross relations. For instance, do fa mi re with mi re do si in the alto, and not combine mi fa mi re. So if it is and it is cut time, we could imagine that it's by half note. And totally change the stately song into a driven and playful fugue. It's being convincing, but in a different aspect of the choice from the get-go. Choral style, SATB. And I think on the piano we have more choices of legatos than detached, but we can do over legato or just connected or air legato before it's shorter, then becomes staccato and a change of character. But if it's singing, you can be singing moderato, singing allegro, but I don't think you can sing it presto. It's ridiculous. Fun, but ridiculous to me. But then again, if you practice it in that direction, and you can make out of it something so uplifting compared to the more, let's say, meditational. And I think the calm tempo is preferable, because when you have the complexities of the entrances towards the end in the stretto, which are overlapping, all these imitations are more heard if you go fast. But I wanted to develop different options and explore them for you through the articulation, but also through what it suggested between the meter choice, but also by the quality of the phrasing in the articulation. In the D minor combination of Book 1 and 2, he's gone in both cases for incredible velocity. Must have been a D minor special for Bach, because in the first book you have the arpeggios of triads, of course offbeat, 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. As if the left hand is constantly 1/16th note behind, which it is, because rather the right hand is 1/16th note earlier. This anticipation is Beethoven's G major sonata. And here, and of course that is the major danger for the performer's tempo keeping, is that this excitement of this unaligned two hands in terms of the harmonization between the bass note and the departure of the arpeggio dropping from the fifth down to the root of the triads, gives that impression of racing between the two hands and therefore rushing, period, which is very, very, very not right. And you feel like, okay, take my breath and be steady. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2. If he wanted it to be aligned, it would have been terrible, but I demonstrate. But just being a 16th note off, for the articulation, I suggest either total detachment with scratching fingers on the keys, the tips of the, I call it touch the key, just sliding quickly. This way, in a faster tempo, you can still have air legato. But you could also hold it a little longer and make it legato. It's like the first prelude. The point is it arpeggiation or is it chordalization? What I call chordalization is when you hear them quasi-played together or holding enough, which is probably what he obtained on the harpsichord, an arpeggiation chordal connection. If you play it slower, difficulty of the tempo when it's not too slow is about how it drives towards an arrival point. And where is the arrival point? But the phrase of the opening structure, identify D minor, which is the purpose of the prelude, before, pre in Latin. Is it 1-4-5-1, 1-2-5-1? Most of the time is 4, subdominant. And it's not because it's under the dominant in the scale. It's because the subdominant is the 5th in the circle of 5ths under the tonic, and the dominant is the 5th above. So now you can visualize the pivotal exact counterpart of the dominant is the subdominant. And in the circle of 5ths. The 7/5 of each key start with the subdominant in the order. In the case of D minor, G, D, A, G, D, A, E. And what do you do after? Well, a tritone. Devil in music short than a perfect 5th. In major, you could have the 7 with the first being subdominant, the last leading tone, creating the tritone on both ends, like as if it's north and south pole, magnetic or closing. In minor, you cannot do that because you already hit, because of the flat 6, which is the model note. If not, 3 and 6 are major. 3 and 6 are minor, or 3 is major, 6 is minor, or minor 3, 6 is major, then you have ascending minor, is a mode in the options of 3 minors, ascending, descending, or harmonic. So you have variants of minor, melodic ascending, descending. The tetrachords are inverted on the way down, but you still have tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, which is what is every major scale always. Tone, tone, semitone. But in minor is tone, semitone, tone if you do the minor 3rd, and then the major 6th. And if you do the minor 6th, then you have the leading tone, opening gap of the augmented 2nd, which is it's not a scale. A scale is tones and semitones in order to contain the organization of the step motion. The original 5ths are very stretched. You cannot sing like that, but if you jump 1, you obtain step motion by jumping over a 5th of the circle of 5ths. That's as simple as that. And here, when he has a bass note that is in the tonic, Bach uses a circle of 5ths and the traveling system through the dial, or to modulate to the relative major, which of course he could have gone directly because you have 2 common tones out of 3 in the F major triad of the relative major and the D minor of the root position tonic. Let's travel. Well, he doesn't do that, but he could have. And I think that the bass note is the guiding, not only because it comes before, and then the right hand enters after the first ostinato of D, or distinato, or in French, re for the Latin, restinato. It doesn't exist, but I like to call it like that. And then moving. And when the harmony changes 1/2 of the bar, and then in the structure that follows, it's 1 harmony on every beat. which is why it gives the illusion that it's rushing, but it is meant to be so, because the harmonic tempo is tighter, stretto. So you have to take into account the harmony changes, but their pulse, harmonic pulse through the piece, which then you don't need to rush. I mean, if you could, try not to count loud voice, use metronome, do anything you can to be steady while your fingers play all the notes. But when the harmonic opening is very static because of the ostinato, you have 1, 4, 5, 1 or 7, 1 on the tonic. And then in that bar number 3, you change the harmony every quarter note. It's 4 times faster, or twice faster if you had 2 changes only in the bar before and 4 after. And when he finishes the piece, he even goes a harmony every 8th note. Bach and chromaticism, that is a love affair, a passion, an addiction for him. So much, of course, the well-tempered. Well, mine is not very tuned today, but tempered is about the tuning that is unifying the unisons to the detriment of the thirds. So, if you do major thirds, it's big. Not as much, but a bit larger than an octave, so it's not consonant. But once you squeeze a little bit the major thirds, then you hold inside the octave. Every octave is unison, you can be in every key. And therefore the chromaticism is the semitoning. Every beat, every bar, everything is semitoned. Like here. In Greek, chroma means color, like colorizing, and I imagine that for Bach the chromaticism was also a daring. That's why he wrote the chromatic fantasy and fugue. And always in minor. Most of the time the chromaticisms are in minor. I guess it's because of the mood that the semitones, suggestive of the semitone of the tetrachord or the minor mode, but everywhere. Because you can harmonize. But you also can do just the natural steps, or and harmonize every of the chromatic steps of the semitones. So you start with, and you end up. I think that it determines also the tempo choice, the articulation choice, the phrasing choice, the direction of line choice, how you organize your pedal. If you put pedal like, since you don't have passing tones, you can put the pedal harmonization, but then you hear skeleton is, but in the articulation of crisp. So what I suggest in this kind of quick changing harmonies is to make a little bit of a slur or a tiny bit of over legato for a chosen first note. Finger pedal. You don't have to lift all the 88 dampers just for this. It sounds soupy, and if you do, you could also, in the left hand, ascending fourth, descending third, ascending fourth, which is just keeping in the range. It's always perfect fifths, but in fourths, up and down. And you could put a phrasing, but you don't have to, but it helps. What I'm trying to display here is that the choices that are yours, of the details of the articulation, all detached, all legato, or a combination of. And this combination of can be on the beat. It could be then or in the left hand, or off beat, which I think is preferable because it helps that sense of constant rebounding, constant motion forward. And in Book Two, he's really, I think, exploring all the possibilities of scales and of hands playing together in the same range. You'll ask me, why do I play it so fast? I can argue, yes, it's 3/4, not 3/8 as a meter, therefore it's not a bar beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's the typical package of 4 bars hypermeter capsule of Bach. But it's not in 3/8, therefore it might be a 3/4, which means that perhaps each beat is as meaningful in the bar than the bar is a group of the 4 bars. It's like Russian dolls. Start from the small, you add another on top, and then so the advantage of playing it less fast is that you hear the suspension for 3 and 7, 6, 8, 7, and then left hand. Always starting off beat, and the point of starting a beat is to arrive on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, and you can bring out the anticipation of the offbeat more than the bass of the beat, which is more settling, but you could do even detached. And when Bach wants to obtain this effect of quick accelerando by busyness of the texture, he has 16th notes against 16th notes in opposition direction scales, and not parallel. So he makes you practice the scales in different directions, but at the same time note for note. Whenever in the opening we have 16th notes in one hand, 8th note in the other, and of course inverted. But even inside the capsules of the beat in the left hand, so much is happening. It's not just, imagine if it was very basic Bach, not even Bach. You wouldn't have this inner voice in the pattern of the left hand apparent Alberti before Alberti. So does it mean that we have to hold it and bring it out? Or should we hear it, think it, organize it, hint it in the playing, but be aware of it? If you hold the middle note and you play staccato, the up and bottom one of each pattern of triads in 3 sounds, inversions or root position, but in groups of 4, inevitably you have to restate it. You have to play one of the 4, one of the 3 on the 4th, 16th note, and he chooses to be the middle note. So if you're holding the middle finger and you do, or the bottom, then you can hint it in the playing without, of course, displaying it as a held and poked, but in this case for the performance. And that's already too much. It's too much. In entirely non-legato, air legato, crisp legato, detaccato after all. And I think to enhance the expression of this rush in different directions, either together, either exponentially expanding, I think both should be legato, because it gives even more intensity. Oh, you could play it also the air legato. And I agree that after all Bach wrote it, I only play it. He wrote 16th in one, 8th in the other, and now he writes 16th in both. I should be doing the same 16th, crisp legato, air legato, call it what you want. But I don't think so. I think it's more enticing. Yabba-dabba-dabba-dabba-da. Harpsichord, these two hands being in complete overlapping, like in the Ravel sonatine. Could have imposed, of course, on the harpsichord. You can have two keyboards. On the piano you don't. But then the combinations don't blend. You could play this softer, and then this more speaking, and play detached the lips of the intervals that are corresponding to the suspended ostinato of the A on the top. And then if you play in different voicings, this softer but the bass, and then just legato the neighboring tone, do si do, and then crisp the do la, do la. Or perhaps he wanted it to be blending and be equally important. He could have done. But he chooses when to play 16th notes against his 16th note and when not to. Or he stopped before that. And I think that when we enter in this detailed vision of every element that is given for our fingers to play, for our ears to hear, for our mind to organize, for our inspiration driven, possibly jubilant in D minor, but jubilant in the sense of this positive energy, I think you find your tempo according to the capacity of your articulation, given you practice it with hold and poke by 3 or by 1, or then the rhythms by 1 and 3 is a sample of the articulation of the crisp, but not all in a row, because that is of course practicing in chain systems where you add an element until you hear all of it, and in the ending he has the left hand overlapping in with the right hand and doing in a fifth, and then a fourth, and then a third, and then a sixth, and the other ones. So if it was, you clearly understand, but when it's overlapped, it becomes like an engine of combination, of combustion. So many beautiful things, so many beautiful things, so much exciting things. And for the fugue, when he plays the fugue, or he taught or played the fugue of Book One, he chose to make a normal answer and not the tonal answer. And when you do the natural or normal answer, you will produce exactly the pattern. Ré, mi, fa, sol, mi, fa. La, si, do, ré, si, do. That would be the total parallel, exact reproduction of the dominant of the subject when you have the answer, which then obliges him to do a bridge to return to D minor for the third voice entrance. If the first is on from A to D to A, then the second in the answer is A to E. So you have to return to the dominant to restart the third voice on the tonic. If he had done a tonal answer with the mutation, the fifth becomes an inversion, the fourth, and then you're already on your D for the third voice. And I remember, I didn't think it was arrogant. I thought it was because I was a child and I was passionate about all these elements of music that I discovered with Mademoiselle Boulanger, age 7. And I brought to my lesson a version of this fugue that I wrote. It was not an assignment. I self-assigned it to myself on top of everything else I had to do as assignments to make a mutation to make it a tonal answer. Instead of. And when I finished playing it, I realized even more so that there was a purpose for which Bach didn't do it. Because it basically sounds terrible. Though, right? And I will always remember Mademoiselle Boulanger thinking and thanking in hindsight that she was not, let's say, mad at my apparent, even if well meant or well intended arrogance. Who am I to rewrite Bach? But you know, I learned so much from that experience, because Bach uses mostly tonal answers, so with a mutation. And when he doesn't, he needs to add that little bridge before the next voice. It's not a big deal by itself. It's not like, oh my God, the fugue is better because it is modal or tonal or real or tonal answer. Well, this personal memory moment aside, let's go back to the universal meaning of the music. Step motion for a fourth. And then a leap of a sixth. So what do? Step motion to the fourth, you return, and all of a sudden before you finish, to go to the dominant, you hug it by the appoggiatura above. It's not a musicological term, the hug of the fifth. Appoggiare means leaning. And I find that this expression of the leap of the sixth, after all these step motions quasi, has to be brought out. Re, si. And so in the contra subject, he also uses the expressive rising sixth with the one of the answer, which is a sixth because it is a real answer and not tonal. And then in the bridge, he has another sixth rising. And the gesture of the rising fifth through the appoggiatura of the sixth is endearment, is love, it's emotion. He does that in all his arias when it's an aria of intense tenderness, in his passions and cantatas, or his organ C minor prelude, well, one of many. composers, Wagner in Tristan, Chopin in the Waltz, Beethoven in the Pathétique, or in the Tempest. So you can say, yes, everybody wrote an ascending minor 6. So what if the minor 6 by itself is just an interval? I think in the Fugue of Book 1, he could have kept it all in this middle range of just few notes around the D. But that he stays until he leaps up. And not by the step, but returning to the tonic and then going to it. Of course, when you perform the piece, you cannot demonstrate all that. You have to watch it, hear it, imagine it, understand it, integrate it in your phrasing legato quality. And perhaps the 16th note with the decoration after the 8th notes of the theme in step motion can be considered a launcher for the 6th. Re, do, re, si. From the second 16th note, of course, 2, 3, 4, 1. And the beginning is also a rest, and the beginning in the 8th notes also 2, 3, 4, 1, but by 8th notes, not. Or he chooses when to be 8th notes, when to be 16th notes. It's his right. In the C sharp, in the D major, they're all fast. He could have been also. That's the you see, the more you study them, the more you play them, the more you know them, the more you chew them, speak them, sing them, solfege them, write them, and all what you can use is a device way to become the piece. You start hearing echoes of other of the choices he made for decorations or for. So yes, it's not wrong to have this kind of association of thoughts. You have to do that. You have to constantly connect dots, visualize, imagine, remember, recall. And if you can't, that's okay, but you might. And the more you exercise that connection of dots, the better it is. And then it ultimately doesn't mean that you know it better because you can play it slower or faster. It's a question then of aesthetic presentation for the quality of the singing. Now, if you play it in a faster tempo, then it cannot be so legato or singing because it'll be partly dense, suggestive, not only sang. I personally think it's a valuable and viable option, though I personally think that if he had written in quarter notes, we would naturally, longer the value, more vocal the fugue inspired appears to me at least. But then it's also subjective because in a way he chose to write some things in 16th, something in 30 seconds, some situations in 8th notes, quarter notes, half notes, whole notes, double whole notes, the square. That's more rare. But let's say we are influenced visually by the fact that we see more 16th notes than 8th note, and we play it faster. For instance, in Book 2 he does the Ascension of the Force by third. Again an appoggiatura, 4/3. And then the chromatic descent. As usual, he rushes the rising, and then he inches down calmly the descent before the answer. feisty because of the triplets combined with the eighth notes of 16th notes by 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So when you have 16th notes by 3, it's a tiny bit faster, busier, and then by 4 or by 2 or by 8th notes, it's more settled. And so he combines the two in a way that sounds almost like as if the triplet is an over-decorated pattern. If he could have done with 16th notes by 2 8th notes, by 2 for a quarter note. Bordissimo, very boring. Oh, it's like, it's some kind of thrust of the sextuplets. He could have done. Where to do the triplets beginning, where to do the eighth notes calmly in the second half of the subject with a chromatic descent after the ascension. And when you combine this in the core of the fugue, it becomes so busy, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1 against each other at sextuplets, note for note. So I must have rattled the harpsichord. And an example of combined two voices in the left hand. That's what you don't want to come up. A combination la sol fa re sol fa mi do fa, but to hear the sol fa fa mi with so you have the combination in the same hand of the circle of fifths ascending fourth, dropping fifth. The chromatic in the same hand. So you can do legato, non-legato, or you could do soft and loud. Or the opposite. But you have to make something, because if not, it blends. It's, let's say, shouldn't, could, might, because of the decay of the tempo for the long dotted eighth note, and also because the ear always hears the moving parts rather than the holding parts. But I think it's reducing it to a single voice of combined two voices, which could be brought out more like, and with the right hand. A minor of Book 2, he does a lot of chromaticism. I think that's the big signature of Bach, exploring the well-time period with chromaticisms. And notes. It's tempting, but it's important to not get tempted and bring out the voicing, true voicing. When we reach the E-flat major of Book 1 and 2 for the prelude, I think for him, E-flat major in the choices for these unusual tonalities to write in was in both books pastoral, benevolent, amiable. I mean, when you hear in Book 2, they're both unfeisty, undriven in the sense of rhythmic patterns of syncopations or tivatos of 30 seconds. No, it's just very peaceful. Of course, he identifies first 5 of 4, then 5 and 1 to establish the E-flat major key. Whenever in Book 2, he establishes the dominant for once. And then 2, 5, It's only 8th bar that you have the subdominant. But he writes it in 9/8 with long shorts for the ta-dum, pa-da-dum, or the impulse on the short ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-da. Whenever in the prelude of 4/4 in book 1, it's more square, and of course you have held notes, held notes, whole notes, held, whole notes. That was difficult to say. Tongue twister. And inside, so if you think of the 16th notes more decorative, you could eventually, in order also to help the long values not decay too much, play faster, lighter 16th notes and louder, longer, harmonically holding, organ style holding without decay, at least without too much denial in attempting it. You tell the listener, I want to bring this. But if you play it in 4/4 with a little more time on each beat, the departure of the 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 1, it's very important to show that you don't start on the beat. Then you have the subdominant on the second beat, and then you have the dominant 7th of that subdominant secondary dominant 5/4. And I'm not always thinking that it's necessary to always subdivide the articulations by 2 and 2 or 3 and 1, or I think it's pedantic. On the piano it doesn't sound convincing, even if it's a bowing issue. Or just play one bundle. Heavy legato, finger legato, finger pedal, or just legato without overlapping. Because the character is to reach the point. And therefore the flow of the 16th notes inside should be lighter touch. Whenever in book 2, I brought you out the tenor so much that we don't hear anymore the beautiful soprano. And guess what? There are 6th. He reserves those incredibly beautiful, meaningful, emotional, driven, expressive leaps very cautiously. He doesn't just bring them everywhere. He chooses where and when. A 3rd, a 4th, and a 6th. So you have a progressive rising and therefore stretching. The 3rd, the 4th, the 6th. It's so meaningful. And of course, the reassurance, the ostinato in the bass, for me it's more like a consolation, a solace. Every other part is moving in a rising motion. And you reach the G, which is the highest note since the beginning. But in a 4-bar progression, and then besides this and the ostinato, you have it seems like a free voice, which it is. Si, mi, re, do, mi, la, si, do, la, fa, no, re, as if the tenor is not even aware of what the others are doing. The decorations in the right hand, the ostinato in the left hand. Si, mi, re, do, mi, la, si, do, la, fa, la, re, mi, fa, re, mi. And then you want to bring it with an impulse of the short long, or with the weight but without accent on the downbeat. The long, short, long, short, long, or short, long, short, long. So it's in fact three elements: the static bass, the free moving middle voice, and the very organized rising of the right hand, stretching from the third to the fourth to the sixth. Now, all this is written anyway. I don't have to say it for you to hear it. But the awareness of it makes you play it with an intention, with an intense direction, as if magnetically you're attracted to go from here in 4 bars to that, in the right hand part. Of course, you play it, you hear it, you feel it, you don't have to explain it, and when you perform it, but you have to think to organize the dosaged crescendo, if not dosaged rising of the elements by Bach, going from this to this on a harpsichord of 6 or 7 octaves. That was quasi the whole keyboard. So it is a lot of exploration of the quality of hearing of the different ranges for him at the time escapes us today. If it was written, yeah, we would, oh my God, that's the extremes. But here it is, which is for his time almost that. In the sense that you want to bring a sound color that's very warm, and then progressively is rising, more clear, perhaps more detached, but air legato, and then crescendo only towards the G. Of course, he could have continued. That was my moment of delirium, but that's okay, because I want to play it exactly with the fruition of the elements, not beyond and not under, the right tone. And that tone comes with articulation, with the phrasing and the tempo and the pedal. I think if you can avoid the pedal, it's already one less problem. And make sure you always observe the length of the dotted quarters when the 8th notes on the top are in the flow. And here same. Because if I play the right hand, 8th notes on each beat, and left hand, ostinato, by intermittence with rests. So if you're over aware of so many details of the intense intention of Bach, then it becomes too busy. You have to always accept to hierarchize them and choose which one you'll bring. If you think the tenor distracts too much from the soprano part, that's very beautiful, the soaring right hand. If you want to bring the middle voice, of course you can do all and at the same time, and it becomes heavy and busy because you're so aware of it and you want to hear it, but you want it to also to be very aired and very spread in the texture, not so intense, for the pastoral opinion I have of the piece. So I could choose a mezzo piano sound. So let's say I'm going to try to see if I can be convincing in my performance of a faster tempo with all these elements, perhaps a little bit less represented because they have to blend in the group, but it also then gains a flow of the 4 bars capsule hypermeter. Compared to the because you have more time to do more subdivisions of the articulations, slur or 2 and 1, or of the beat, or legato, and then detached, the neighboring tone legato, and the slightly detached for the arpeggiated triad. And that's always the problem. We have to choose the combination between the group of bars for the hypermeter and then a harmonic progression, and then see how much it's important to you to be elegantly decorating details which in the faster tempo are just one generic pattern, and when it's slightly slower, of course you can still play it all legato, but because you have a little more time, you can start shaping details. Not all are slurred, not all are detached. It's a combination. And when it's faster, it blends. And when it blends, I think it loses its flavors or its richness of flavors. That's why if it's too slow, then you're too much in the detail, which is beautiful, but very difficult to make a sense of the narrative storytelling arrival point of each phrase, the dynamic not dynamic, magnetic attraction. There must be this medium tempo between every beat being detailed, but all the groups of beats with a group of bars making one phrase of 4 bars. 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 3, 4, 2, 3. And once you find that combination between the tempo for the traction of the mood that comes from the harmonic progression tempo, from the articulation details of leaps or neighboring tones or passing tones, step motion, all these elements I think are ingredients that bring you to find a tempo and a phrasing and a dynamic range, therefore a coating of the expression of the piece that is depending not only but also on impulsive, emotional, or musically driven response to it, but also because of the fact that you have to play it. Even if you wrote it or sing it or solfege it, ultimately you play it. And you play it because you've wrote it, because you've heard it, because you've solfeged it. I think that these are the ingredients, but they're not the determining factors individually. It depends how you blend them and how you hierarchize the importance of all these elements, the articulation, the phrase direction. And between this and that, you have to find a way that you can embed the one in the other, and so become persuasive with the expression that you want to confer to the piece. And then you can also change mind and practice it towards a completely different way of playing it, because it implies different fingerings. If it's going to be faster or slower, it's not just a question of tempo or speed. It's a question of motion, of mood, of projection, of taking in account the texture itself in his choices of rhythmic patterns and rhythmic values. For instance, the fugues of E-flat major in both books couldn't be more contrasting. Vindicative, driven down beat starting, which is to be noted. Fugue subject going from the tonics, the subdominant to the dominant. And the answer, absolutely tonal, because you have the third and answer is second. But nevertheless, he starts yabba dabba 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 dump on the downbeat. Like this too was, well, on its beat, because it was the first beat west. I'm sorry, I didn't want to confuse. So I know that it's possible to think against my own will, to try to convince myself of course I hear more things because I have more time to hear them. In phenomenology that is fact. But in the drive of the expression, perhaps Bach for sure wanted also some of the fugues to the 16th note, I guess, suggestion to be more finger than singing. I think of F major Book 2. Sort of a jig in 16th notes. Here it's not a jig, it's 4/4, so it's square. And this interruption of the subject in the middle of it is even more striking because you feel like you already finished your subject. And you have. But then you have the leap of the 7th. Not even the 6th anymore. As before, the appoggiatura of the 6th is the 7th. As before it was the 6th hugging the 5th. That's again, it's not a musicological term. I should say appoggiatura, not hugging. What he could have done, the ascending 6th before, and just have the pattern of patterns of the step motion. So if you take for granted the leap of the 7th in that speed, if it was to be played fast, at least in these values, 16th notes, 8th notes, if there is something that has to be brought, either accent the beat, which I don't recommend, or rather impulse, the lifting before you reach the top note to launch it from the F with a tiny, if not accent, impulse. Perhaps even slur it. If you play detached, the other ones. If you play legato, the other ones, then you can do. If you want to really bring it out by legato staccato, which I think it's in a way on the piano a bit over-colorizing it in articulations. It could be also the 4/16th note by groups of 3 and 1. That's heavy because it's on the beat. If you do it off the beat, like that, then, or all legato even, which is also a good thing because sometimes over involving with articulations, sub-articulations, expressions, you give the details more importance than the whole. Well, famous balance, micro, macro. Whenever the Book 2 is in whole notes, even if it's cut time. It's really SATB choir. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Christe ele, Christe ele. I'm confused the syllables in my improvised singing. Well, teach me right. subjective of mine to think it's choral because it's long values. But then again, if it's to develop finger articulation, then I think the 16th note fugues are more meant for that. Of course, you could think, okay, perhaps he didn't want it that slow because of the decay, because. Whichever because. And you try to convince yourself, what if I tried in a total different option, fast and feisty? Advocate, but at that point I disagree, I reject, I refuse. No, no, no. Even if it's in cut time, I want to sing it more stretched. Well, sing it, hint it. And who's to say that is loud? The gestures, the fifth, the leap, the fourth, okay, the sixth. In Book 1, E flat minor, as we will see, is very, I think, meditational, even if it's in eighth notes. And here, it could be meditational, even if it's in whole notes and half notes, and occasional sixth and eighth notes. And I think that if it played soft and fast, I think it's ridiculous, meaningless. What is it? It's just flowing, 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 and rushing before you control it. I think the dynamic range and the tempo choice of range are combined. If you do something, singing, but still not fast, which was my first intuition already as a kid. And the legato repeated notes, the changing syllables. Dry striking in tempo, being not too fast, not too slow. It's just medium, but I think it conveys the peace, the pace, and the peaceful pace of the elements that are connected and singing, and because of the long values that don't decay as much when you don't play too slow, or at the same time not become hectic when it's played too fast. To me, too fast, too slow is different to you or to them or to him or to her. And that's the beauty of the piece, that it is versatile to a certain extent. You can say it's proteiformic. Yeah, you can make different things of it with conviction and articulation and practice, because you have to have if not a plan, at least a driven expression for the mood you want to set in each piece, even if by itself it's pure music. And it is. And so I think that over-involved might be as bad as non-involved enough. And I find that this is the definition of the choosing the interpretation because of what you read, because of what you hear, or because of what you combine of the two.